week where she was staying in Cleveland. Are we okay with the restaurant? Did they confirm it?
Oh, yes, they're confirmed.
Okay,
so
good.
they'll be good.
Because it might be a little earlier now, but that's
If
fine.
you're gonna take a cab over there, then they'll
Well,
be good.
whatever you want me to do, I'll take a cab, sure.
Okay, we can take care of that for you, and then,
Well, couldn't the driver take me there
oh,
and
no,
wait
no,
and
no,
wait?
the driver is supposed to meet you at the restaurant, so.
Well, couldn't he meet me here? And
Okay. And do you have a favorite genre to work in as an actor?
I like radio a lot better. There's not much work in radio.
Right.
Because you don't have to shave or wash or
Right.
anything. You just come in and talk and act. But there is no radio to do. I do a lot of radio. I had my own radio talk show on KABC in Los Angeles for 2 years, and I love doing it. But I haven't had the time since I've been back here. Of the three other film situations, I think I like big budget, long shooting movies, because you usually get to be someplace unusual. You get to meet the people very clearly that you're working with, get to know them very well. And if you pick a good big budget picture, you can also make a lot of money and make your name get back on the screen again, whatever, if it's been off the screen.
And you were involved in politics in real life, but then you sort of got involved in politics and entertainment as well. For Bullet, could you just talk about, you played a politician there?
I really wasn't associated with political roles until Bullet, and Bullet, I'm not entirely certain what the character was in Bullet, whether he's a district attorney or aspiring governor or what it was, but that kind of got the public, because the movie was very successful. I think it was number 7 in terms of money made in 1968. And from that point on, I got a lot of political roles. I played Teddy Roosevelt, I played Woodrow Wilson, I played Franklin Roosevelt, I played Harry Truman, and I played Richard Nixon. But I won my Emmy for playing H.R. Haldeman.
Right, yeah.
And Jason Robards played Richard Nixon in that particular Romana Clef.
Now, is that something you enjoyed? It just happened? Did you?
Well, I've always
yeah.
been fascinated by politicians, not politics so much as the kind of people that aspire to high office, why they do, and how they conduct themselves when doing it. It's always just curiosity more than anything else. And I guess once I did the FDR one-man show, which got a lot of publicity, people started thinking of me as other American presidents for some reason.
Does that, when you undertake one of these political roles, you then bury yourself in the history of it?
In the case of the presidents, with the exception of Teddy Roosevelt and Harry Truman, the events in those stories occurred when they were very, very young, before they ever became involved in politics. The other 3 presidents I did a lot of research on. And in the case of Haldeman, this was a 12-and-a-half-hour show called Washington Behind Closed Doors. Incidentally, it was originally called Washington, D.C., but Gore Vidal, who's an old friend of mine, had a book out called Washington, D.C., so they had to change the title of the show to Washington, Behind Closed Doors. Anyway, I got as much information. Haldeman wrote a book called Ends of Power, and I use that quite considerably. He mentions me in the book in the sense that he says, even in my worst moment in my job at the White House, I was never as evil as Robert Vaughn was in the television show about me. But I did do a lot of investigation into Haldeman's life to play that part.
Pretty much, you also got almost a graduate degree in American history in the 20th century.
Oh, yeah.
By all these roles that you undertake.
No question about it. Yes, I was starting back with Woodrow Wilson's the first person I really got involved with. Yes, no question, I got it. But I've always been kind of curious about American history after the turn of the century, after 1900. Just as when I read, if I see something there, and 3 or 4 different things, something in that area, I usually read that.
Well, I was reading an article about you in the early 70s, and there was another American icon, not political, but Porky Pig that was mentioned. Could you just talk about that? Porky Pig and Ferdy the Frog?
Yes, when my partner, who's still alive, Sherwood Price, matter of fact, we're hopefully doing a picture next spring in Calgary, when I originally met him, he owned a theater in Tustin, California, in Southern California. And that's how we met. And I worked at his theater quite a bit. And over the years, we just got to know each other along the way. And we decided that at some point to form a production company. Well, somewhere during that 5-10 year period, he was called Ferdy Frog. Why? I can't tell you. I was called Porky Pig. I have no idea. Well, we decided we have to name the company something, so we named it Ferd Porky, which it appears to be French to most people. It's nothing. It's Ferdy and Frog and Porky Pig, and that's what's on all my my envelopes and all my checks and everything is for Porky Productions. So that's the great deep meaning of the whole thing.
So you don't do an impression of?
No, well, people always say, what is that word? Is that French? And I say, well, it's kind of a combination of a number of things.
Right. But one of your projects in the early 70s was the Protectors. Could you
Yes.
talk about how you got involved with Lou Grade?
Yes, Lou Grade, wonderful character. In the spring, I met my wife in June of 1970. In the spring of 1971, we were then living together, and I still had a lot of problems in the United States in terms of everything that was going on there. And I was offered this television show in London that would be filmed in London and on the continent, in Europe, 26 episodes. And my romance with my wife was just very fresh, and I thought, well, this would be a good thing for me to be able to get away from the country for a while, do something interesting with my girlfriend, who would be my wife. I didn't know it at the time, and work in England, because I always loved working in England. I just loved it. Lou Grade was, of course, eventually Lou Grade was Sir Lou Grade, and then Lord Lou Grade before he died. But he was something out of another era. He was like an old vaudevillian. He had a cigar the size of Churchill's, and the day I arrived at the Dorchester Hotel in London to start the series the first year, this Daimler limousine came up that we were in, a magnificent big thing, bigger than a Rolls-Royce limousine. And we pulled in front of the Dorchester Hotel, which is one of the pricey big hotels in London. And a guy came running out, opened the trunk of my car, didn't open the door for me, a big cigar, bald head, and he grabbed our luggage and started taking it in. And I said, I'm sorry, sir. He said, don't worry, he said, Lou Grade's the name, I'm producing the show. That's how I met Lou Grade. He was carrying my luggage into the Dorchester Hotel. And I never saw him after that, ever again, in 3 years I was there. I saw him subsequently since I did the show there. And Lou Grade's theory was, if you got a star, he hired Roger Moore, he hired Tony Curtis, he hired Trelane MacLean, not Barry Sullivan, the guy that, anyway, he did a series for Universal. But Burke Marshall. Anyway,
Right.
there were 4 or 5 well-known American names at the time. And the experience was this. Because of the unions at that time in London, they're not that way now because I've just finished working there again. You started work at 8:30 in the morning. At 9:30 in the morning, you had what they called a tea break. Now, tea break was supposed to not stop the filming. Well, it did every day. Stopped the filming until about 10:15. Then you went to lunch from 1 o'clock until 2 o'clock. Then there would be a tea break at 3:30. Once again, it was supposed to not stop the show. Tea break would go on until about 4:15, and then you finish filming at 5:20. If you wanted to go to 5:35, you had to get all the crew together, and they had to vote on the extra 15 minutes. Well, by the time you got all the crew together, the 15 minutes was gone. So that was the living condition you did under the unions in the early 70s. So if you were to go to do it, I did 26 half-hour shows, which should have taken, 50 weeks. It took 18 months to do them because of this truncated schedule. And that was the biggest difference. Otherwise, it's basically the same kind of filming, except the unions made it intolerable to turn out product. They didn't seem to be bothered by it because they didn't know anything else. And then we went back and did a second year. Marty Landau and his wife went over to do a show, and they asked me what it would be like, and I said, well, this is what it'd be like. You get picked up in a Daimler limousine, you'll stay in the finest places in town. Every time there's a Royal Command performance, you'll be invited. You can meet the Queen Mother, and everything like that. All these things. He said, and I said, and anything you want, you raise your hand, they'll give it to you. You'll give you unlimited first-class tickets back and forth to New York, but they'll only pay 79 cents for scripts. That's exactly what it was. Well, they went over to do a show. They were there for 3 years, not understanding the concept, and I warned them up in advance. I said, you're going to do an hour show, and you're going to do 26 shows. It's going to take a long time. Well, they were not happy with the experience, largely because the scripts weren't very good, but mainly it ended their marriage, as a matter of fact, I think. And that's my experience with it.
Could you describe the premise of The Protectors?
Premise of The Protectors, I don't know. It was myself and a guy named Tony Anholt, that's his real name, and Nairi Dawn Porter is the girl's real name, and they're both dead. Everybody's died. It was just 3 people doing some kind of detective work around London. That was the premise. Nobody put a lot of thought into getting anything interesting. They wanted Robert Vaughn over there to commercialize on The Man from U.N.C.L.E. in London, in England. That's what it was about, as it was with Tony Curtis and Roger Moore. And Shirley MacLaine actually walked out she was filming in Hong Kong, and she got onto this British schedule, and she just took a plane and left, and they had to scrap the shows, and I don't think she got sued.
And it was sort of unusual that it's a detective show, but 30 minutes. So
Well, it was even shorter. It was 27 minutes or something.
Yeah,
You know,
so
commercials. Yeah, so you had 3 actors.
right.
You had to have a guest star. You had to have a strong action running, car chase or something, all in 27 minutes. Different story. Well, that was the problem. It wasn't doable.
You also worked with Harry Morgan over there.
I don't think so.
That was mentioned here. No.
No, I don't think so. No.
Mm.
I mean, I would remember if I did.
Right. So when you come back to Los Angeles, your career almost goes back to the 50s in a way, and you begin to do a lot of guest stars.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most famous is Policewoman, in which you actually directed an episode too.
Yeah, I knew
Can you
Angie.
talk about that?
Well, Angie Dixon, I had known since when she was John F. Kennedy's lover. I mean, everybody knows about this. And she was doing this series called Policewoman, and she wanted me to do a particular segment. It was an hour show. And I said, well, what am I going to, I mean, something unusual. It was a kind of a normal Robert Vaughn role, 3-piece villain, 3-piece suit villain. And he said, well, how can I make it better? She said, how would you like to direct one? I said, okay, that's okay with me. So I did. We made a deal. I did the show she wanted me to do, and I directed one of her shows. And that's how it came to be. I realized after directing one of the shows that directing was not anything I was going to want to do anymore, because in television, it's get it on, get it done, get it fast, and get it over. There's no time to discuss anything. And I really never wanted to work that way as an actor, and therefore I could avoid working that way as a director by not directing television. Episodic television.
Right. Were you offered any series during that point, or when you came back to the States?
Right after U.N.C.L.E, in the period 68 to 70, I was offered all kinds of series. I can't tell you their names now because I never even asked to read them because of U.N.C.L.E, obviously. And no, the only other show that I was offered in a series was The Protectors that we just discussed, and that was once again still a carryover in Little Lou Grade's mind. I was still the man from U.N.C.L.E. 4 years hadn't elapsed, or 2 years hadn't elapsed. He was marketing me to his international audience.
And the 70s became a golden age for both the television movie and the miniseries.
Yeah.
And you certainly played a part, as you talked about,
Yeah,
in
just
some of the great projects. How did you decide that, for Watching Behind Closed Doors, that you wanted to get involved in that project?
Well, I was fascinated by the script. Matter of fact, there was another 12 and a half hours that were not done that took the flame from the break-in at Watergate to Nixon's resignation was going to be the second 12 and a half shows. But because the first 12 and a half didn't get as good a ratings as Roots, and everything was measured by the ratings of Roots at that time, we didn't get a chance to do the second 12 and a half shows. However, the good part about it was they paid Jason Robards and Robert Vaughn for the second 12 and a half shows to keep us available if they should do it. Well, we never did it, and we got the money. That was the good part about it. But I was fascinated by the Watergate story. I was always fascinated by Nixon because he was the most unusual man that ever occupied the presidency in many ways. And just to be doing it, although we were not called Nixon and Haldeman in the show, we were. Matter of fact, John Ehrlichman wrote the company was called. It was a paperback that he wrote, and it was based on that paperback, that the series, and the characters were named. I was Frank Flaherty, and Jason was Richard
Munkin?
yeah. And that's of course was Nixon and Haldeman. Yeah. And I love the two guys that wrote it had, I think, won many Emmys earlier and later after that. And it was very, very well researched and well written. So it was a fascinating piece of material that I got to read and say yes to. Then the other ones just was asked to come in, like Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and it was one. It was an Emerald. I did it.
Emerald Point.
Emerald Point. Yes, that was a pilot with the guy from Gunsmoke that died fairly recently.
Was the
Dennis?
Right. Was the production schedule any different from U.N.C.L.E. working on these television movies?
I think at that point they were shooting 7 or 8 days for an hour, whereas supposed we shot only 6, as I mentioned, for the U.N.C.L.E. show.
And then you also worked on some miniseries as well, The Blue and the Gray, Centennial, Captains and the Kings. But why did you choose for the longer format of the television?
Well, there's more care taken. There's more care taken in terms of writing it. There's more care taken in filming, and everything is taking more care. And you got people like Cliff Robertson and Andy Griffith and so on to be on. And they got top-notch people in terms of acting on these miniseries. And then John Gielgud, who did one of the shows I worked on, or I did one of his shows, I should say.
Right. Then in 1982, I saw a clip on YouTube today that had you and David McCollum just meeting for the first time in many years. It was from Good Morning America in 1982. And and then in '83 you did a reunion movie.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about that, getting together with him, and then.
Yes, a friend of mine to this day who produced the Kung Fu series in England was about 17 when Uncle was on the air.
Right.
Michael Sloan is his name. And he sent a script to Sam Rolfe the last year that the show was on the air,
Right.
and they actually accepted the script. This was a 17-year-old kid. So he was so fascinated by the Uncle Show that he said, I want to one day do a movie of the Uncle Show. And he contacted me and said, would I be interested? And I said yes. He contacted McCallum. McCallum said yes. So we did a show called The 15-Year Later Affair, which was done in 80, I guess, whenever. What's 15?
Yeah.
83, yeah.
Right.
And that was a CBS 2-hour movie, which got very good ratings, and won the night, and then never, that was the end of it. So I don't know why they didn't do a second one, because it qualified ratings-wise, but
Did you
I
work
just did
with-
it because I wanted to do Uncle. It was kind of fun.
Did you work with any of the same crew that you'd worked with on NBC?
There were a couple of I think the prop men were the same, and a couple of other people. They tried to get everybody that was, Konicamp, the cinematographer, did do the
Right.
2-hour revival, yes.
Did it feel like closure at least, because you never really did that final
Yeah, we
episode?
did. We had I think we had a couple of evenings out with the same
Right.
people that were in the other show, and there was a kind of closure to it. And I would say that at least once every 2 years, sometimes once every year, I get a notification from an agent, whether it's my British agent or American, saying, would you like to do a Man from U.N.C.L.E. movie, big screen? I say, absolutely. Send me a script and tell me where it's going to be done, how much you got in budget, and I'll tell you whether I want to do it or not. Well, nobody ever sends a script, so that hasn't happened yet. So we'll see. And McCallum, I think, is pretty happy to do it too. David has pretty much steered away from the Man from U.N.C.L.E. in terms of his acting career. He didn't want to be associated with it. I mean, he wasn't against it. He just didn't use it as much as I've used it because it meant so much to me. I really loved it, and he loved it too.
In terms of then in the early 80s, you did go back to a series, and sort of a very different series, the A-Team. Could you talk about how you got involved in that final season?
Yeah, I can't think of John's name. He's since died. He was an actor that I knew in L.A. He was among that group I mentioned earlier. He was in that group. John, he was one of the producers of the A-Team, and he said our ratings are slipping. He said we would like to bring you in as a new character in the 4th year as this general who's in charge of everything, and we'll pay you this much money. And if the show goes on, then we'll have another couple of years. Well, the show didn't go on. I didn't save the show, and that's how it came about. I just knew the producer from when he was an actor.
How different was network television in the 80s as opposed to the 60s?
Well, the only thing I remember different about it was, what's his name? The black guy who was on the show?
Mr. T.
Mr. T.
Right.
Mr. T was the most unusual person I've ever met in my life, bar none. Because he would arrive on the set. He drove a fire engine red Rolls-Royce Corniche, and with the top down. He would arrive in the morning at 7 o'clock, and he'd be in makeup. He would start talking, and at 7 o'clock that night, he was still talking. Nobody ever listened to him, paid any attention to him. He just talked all day, stories, anecdotes, and I'll tell you, and he would leave at 7 o'clock at night. And he did that every day. I mean, he's actually clinically insane, I think, but he managed to earn a good living being clinically insane, so that's all right.
And how about working with George Papard?
Well, George I'd known for many years I knew he and his first wife, Elizabeth Ashley, quite well. I was at their wedding. And just socially getting together with him. I didn't know the other two guys on the show. And one thing George said to me, he said, before you do the show, you got to understand that there's a guy named Mr. T. He said, he's crazy, and you just have to accept his craziness. He said, I can't stand it. I don't even want to see the guy, but I'm stuck with him.
Right. Now, did the shows make any sense to you?
No,
I mean,
they never made sense.
you kidnapped them, and
I think McCallum did one, didn't he? I think
Yeah,
he did.
yeah.
I don't remember I don't remember anything about it. Matter of fact, I was in the back of an airplane quite a bit, giving orders to people with a cell phone. I didn't have a cell phone. Must have been, I don't know.
I guess that was affluence as opposed
Yeah,
to
definitely
art.
affluence. Yeah.
And you were also doing, during that period, you were doing stage work too.
Yeah, I did a play with E.G. Marshall here on the East Coast at the Paper Mill Playhouse in New
Right.
Jersey, which is on the verge of going under financially.
Yes.
I read the other day, and it was a terrific production. I mean, first of all, Inherit the Wind is almost never done. It's being done on Broadway right now because it's such a large cast. It's just too financially impossible. Well, because of the Paper Mill Playhouse in Jersey being subsidized by the state, they were able to have a production. It was a production that could easily have transferred to Broadway. Why it didn't, I don't know. You never know about those things. But it's a piece of material. When I first had some money in 1955, and I went to New York in 56, I went to New York for the first time. I saw two shows that I said, someday when I get big, I can play those parts. One was Inherit the Wind. Paul Muni was playing it at that time. And the other was My Fair Lady with Rex Harrison. I almost got to do My Fair Lady, but then the party that was producing it died. Then Jim Coburn, who was supposed to be in it, died, and never happened. But I got to do one of the two I wanted to do.
It's been written that Inherited Wind, although it deals with evolution, also about McCarthyism too.
Oh, yeah.
Did you did that resonate with you as you were doing it?
No, I basically based what I did in it on what was done with the original production and what was actually happened in the Scopes trial, which is what the production's about.
Right.
I went back to the literature that surrounded that. Find out. Mostly I remember Muni's performance. I don't mean I copied it because it was so many years later, but I just remembered that he was the most elemental force on the stage I'd ever seen. I mean, just stunning. And I think Plummer, according to his reviews, is equally as good this time around. It's a great part.
Right. And then you went back to England recently to do Hustle. Could you just talk about why you decided to do that series? And
in May of 2002, I got a call from my British agent, Jean Diamond. It's a woman. And she said, "Are you coming through London in the near future?" And I said, "Well, that's very strange." Yeah, I said, "You know, we've lived there off and on and spent a lot of time in Wales, London, and England, and Ireland, and so on. And we've never been to Scotland, so we decided we'd just take a 2-week trip to Scotland." This is in the middle of May. I said, "So I'm going to be going through, I think, the last week in May." And why do you ask? She said, "Well, the BBC wants you very much for a new series called Hustle. And let me send you 2 or 3 of the scripts. And let me send you a couple of films that they have, they're a production company called Kudos, and they do a series called Spooks in London, which is called MI5 in America on the BBC. And that'll give you an idea of the production qualities and also give you an idea of what they want to do with the scripts." So I read the scripts, thought they were really good. I thought they were terrific scripts, very fascinating. Saw the 2 TV shows that they'd sent me, and I said, "Absolutely, I'll meet with these people, no question about it." So we had a lovely, long, liquid lunch in a wonderful French restaurant in London. We all hugged each other and promised, we'd be together forever and do this Hustle show forever and so on. That was May. June came, July came, August came, and that was the end of it as far as I never even thought about it. But when we first moved to Connecticut, we found out we have power failures all the time. So we got equipped and have them to this day. Matter of fact, there's one, as this interview is being carried off, we're in the second day of a power failure in Ridgefield, Connecticut, where I live. And we're sitting there with the candles and the flashlights and the television set up battery operated and the radio and everything. And we found out from earlier experiences that one phone in the garage didn't go down when the power went down. So I'm sitting in the family room contiguous to the garage, and I hear the phone ringing. And I said, "Geez, it's 11 o'clock at night, phone ringing," which means it was 4 o'clock in the morning in London. And Jean Diamond, my agent, is on the phone. She said, "They started shooting last Wednesday on Hustle. They want you tomorrow morning to blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. I said, "First of all, you're probably the only person in England talking to the East Coast of America because everything's been shut down from Canada to North Carolina." She said, "I don't care anything about that." She said, "You got to get blah, blah, blah." I said, "Well, how are we going to make a deal?" She said, "There's no, I can make any deal I want. They want you and no one else." This is after 5 months after I met them. So I flew out the next day, started shooting the day after that, and that's how Hustle came to be.
could you talk about the premise and your character?
Yeah, the premise is 5 con people, 1 woman and 4 men living in London, conning people out of their money. Now, the reason the show has worked so far is the public seems to buy the fact that we state repeatedly in the show that we never con anyone who can't afford to be conned financially,
Right.
number 1. And number 2, anybody who's conned normally is part of the con, therefore he is being as dishonest as you are in conning. They're integrated. So that rationalizes why we're able to do con men on screen. The other rationalization is the audiences seem to like the different people in the show for different reasons. The girl is beautiful who does the show. And the second day after I got there, the second day I was shooting, all 11 of the London papers called me to find out what I thought about Hustle, what I thought about my character. Well, I thought nothing about it. I was still jet lagged. I was able to remember my own name. And so I thought, well, I said, let's say this. Let's say Napoleon Solo retired, whatever age, 65 and so on, and on his government pension. And I said, and now he's living a boring life. He's had a whole life of excitement and travel and guns and girls and cars and gambling and everything. What could he do that's reasonably close to in the confines of the law? Why, he could be a con man. So I was dancing in the shadows. I just made it up as I went along. So they bought that. And that's how it's been involved over the last 4 years, that Robert Vaughn is Napoleon Solo, the later years in Hustle. And that's how they describe it, too, in publicity. That's how it came about. And I love the people I'm working with.
Now, how different is working in England now as opposed to the Protectors?
Well, it's just as tiring in the sense that I never got up later than 5:30 any morning, and I usually got home between 7 and 8, ate dinner, and went to sleep again. But they shoot 6 days a week, every week, so you have Sunday off, and that's when you sleep. So it's once again, it's a hard schedule for a different reason. But I love I mean, the British people are wonderful to work with. The actors are terrific. I mean, there's so many actors that are not known in America who basically work in the theater and appear in television shows when they can in England. So we have some wonderful actors that people don't recognize except from English episodic shows. And there's just, there's 1,000 years of history there to film. It's just, you just set up a show. Very often they'll find a location and build a show around the location, something that's interesting. And the first season, the first show aired against a major soccer game. I mean, like, I don't know if it was the championship, but it was right near the championship, and it beat it. So from that point on, we could do no wrong in England. It's now being shown all over the world, and we're supposed to go back for a 5th season. We can't go back until January because 2 of the cast members aren't available in January. Normally we go back in August and finish in December for the following season. This year we probably won't be getting a 5th season that quickly.
Well, do you feel like it's the 6th season way back again? You're working in a series, and then there's a war going on. How do you how do you relate to that, and as both an actor and as a citizen?
As far as the current war, I hesitate. As a matter of fact, I won't say anything about it because I've kept quiet about it for very many reasons. I'm not trying to be secretive about it, but I have many confusions about it, as many other people do, I'm sure. I never really thought about it in terms of hustle. It's just an event that's going on somewhere in the world that we're participating in again.
So are you still active politically as you were, or?
No, not at all. I mean, the only thing I did before, after I married my wife, is we spent a lot of time trying to get legislation in California against child molesters, because the legislation that they had prior to our efforts was ridiculous. They might as well have been car thieves as opposed to child molesters. So we did get a stronger legislation to warehouse child molesters, so they really are kept off the streets until they die. And it's a harsh position to take, but it's a harsh crime. It's the murder of a soul.
Now you live on the East Coast in Connecticut, pretty much like the persona that you
Yes,
had before. Now you are.
I am now a real Eastern person
Right.
with an Eastern home and Eastern dogs and Eastern way of thinking.
Right. Well, I have some questions that just survey the acting career, and let me ask you, what is your proudest professional achievement?
Hamlet. No question. There's nothing. Hamlet is the most interesting and complex character ever written in dramatic literature.
Right.
And to get a chance to have a crack at it 3 times is wonderful. Even if one of the times I had to do it with Jimmy Durante as my co-star.
Do you want to just give us a few favorite lines from Hamlet right now?
My favorite line from Hamlet is Hamlet saying, "There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be not now, it is yet to come. If it is yet to come, it cannot be now. If it does come, it will be now." The line is, "The readiness is all." In other words, life is about getting ready to die. Not to be or not to be, which is also about getting ready to die. Yeah.
I remember I saw Dame Judith Anderson do it in
Oh.
the 70s. That was...
She did Hamlet.
She did
Yes, I
Hamlet,
remember
yes.
that. Yeah,
Right. It was,
yeah.
So...
That's a powerhouse on the screen.
Right. What is your biggest professional regret?
That I didn't do My Fair Lady. I mean, I really prepared for it. I was with a vocal coach for a year. I was raring to go, and Jimmy Coburn was going to do Colonel Pickering. We were going to do it at the school we both went to, City College. And what the City College had done was the president had the idea, it was a lady, and they took all the money from the music department, all the money from the television department, all the money from every department to put on this colossal show of very many people in the cast, of course, starring myself and Jimmy Coburn, who had both gone there. And everything happened, everybody died, and she got transferred, and it wasn't done, but I was ready to go.
And you did music, especially during the Napoleon solo years. You were involved in music, comedy, and sketches.
Well, I did sketches with comedians like
Right.
Danny Kaye and Phyllis Diller and people like that. I didn't do it. I hosted one show called Hullabaloo, which was probably the worst performance on a screen by anybody in the history of television, according to my wife and the director of the show.
What did you sing on Hullabaloo?
I sang 5 different songs.
Right.
Mrs. Brown, You Got a Lovely Daughter, Secondhand Rose, I Got a Girl Just Like the Girl That Married Dear Old Dad, and the Supremes were in the background supporting me.
Okay.
And I got a copy of it. Run it. If I ever get my head too big about anything, I just run that. Say, whoa, really? Is that bad?
Right. I think we're going to another tape, and we just have a few more
Okay.
questions.